It was supposed to be a quick stop, just 2 minutes in and out. A simple errand on the top floor of one of the tallest towers in Atlanta, the kind of place someone like her didn't belong. Every inch of the building reeked of power, polished, brass, and money old enough to have a name. The air conditioning didn't just blow cold, it whispered like it knew it didn't serve folks like her. Zariah Coleman, 22, scholarship student and part-time intern, stood dripping wet outside the executive lounge on the 88th floor, clutching a soggy folder of documents that she had been told to deliver before 8 p.m. sharp. She had no idea the room was under surveillance. No clue the most powerful black man in the city would be watching. And she definitely didn't know that her life, her entire future, was about to shift off its rails because of one simple, desperate decision. The door wasn't locked. The hallway was silent. Her blouse clung to her body like second skin, soaked from the spring rain. She hesitated just a second, scanning the space before stepping inside. It was just a side lounge. Executives barely used it after hours. She wasn't there to hang out, just needed a dry place. 30 seconds tops to wring out her hair and salvage the papers. Warm light bathed the room in gold. A leather couch rested against the far wall like it had never been touched. There was no movement, no hum, just silence. Zariah placed the folder gently on the counter. She peeled off her soaked jacket, then hesitated as she reached for the hem of her blouse. She was shivering. Maybe, just maybe, she could take off the wet shirt, use the towel in her backpack, and change into the spare top she always carried. It didn't feel like anyone was watching, but someone was. A camera, hidden in the ceiling's corner, captured every moment in silent, crisp, high definition. The live feed streamed to only one person, Kingston Wells. He didn't usually monitor security feeds himself, not unless there was a breach or threat. But that night, an alert on his private phone pinged unusual movement detected on the 88th floor. Out of curiosity, he tapped the notification. What he saw made him forget to breathe. The young woman on the screen wasn't a threat. She wasn't a trespasser. She wasn't even someone who should have been on his radar. But there she was, moving like she had nothing to prove and nowhere else to go. Removing her shirt, not out of seduction, but survival. Her exhaustion was etched into every gesture. She didn't know what kind of world she had wandered into or whose eyes might be watching, and still, she moved like someone with nothing to hide. Just a girl trying to stay dry and stay sane. He should have shut off the feed, deleted it, reported the access. But he didn't. He leaned in closer, narrowed his eyes. Then he saw it just beneath her collarbone as she bent to towel. Her hair, a tattoo small, faded. A sunburst cupped by an open hand. It struck him like a thunderclap. That symbol wasn't random. It wasn't common. It wasn't even public because it belonged to his mother. In that moment, Kingston Wells, a man who built his billion-dollar empire from the ashes of his father's corruption, felt something rise in his chest. Not lust, not guilt, but recognition. And a haunting ache that came only when the past collided with the present in ways too precise to ignore. He didn't know her name, not yet, but he would, because whatever that moment was, it had just changed everything for both of them. Zariah Coleman never imagined she'd one day work in a building she used to stare at from the MARTA bus window glass so reflective it looked like it held the sky. It was the kind of place where security guards barely glanced her way, but somehow always clocked her shoes. She was 22, one semester away from graduating with a double major in business finance and social welfare. Her resume was pristine, her drive unmatched, but her life was a universe apart from the luxury that surrounded her at Wells Group headquarters. Her world was made of dollar store planners, subway rides, and worn-out sneakers with dreams bigger than her rent-controlled apartment in the West End. She survived on part-time jobs, scholarship crumbs, and stubborn determination. Her life had been stitched together from shelters, foster homes, and distant relatives who always made it clear she wasn't their problem. Still, Zariah carried herself with grace, quiet strength, never asking for what she hadn't earned. Never letting anyone see how close she was to breaking. Her internship at the Wells Group, a miracle, a lifeline. She couldn't afford to mess it up, no matter how late the hours or how many extra coffee runs it took. Meanwhile, Kingston Wells existed in a world so elite, it might as well have been on another planet. At 35, he was a self-made black billionaire, the one who took over his late father's corrupted empire and flipped it into something lean, sharp, and untouchable. His face rarely appeared outside Forbes covers and investment roundtables. No social media, no scandals, no distractions. His tailored suits were like armor, his silence calculated power. He didn't walk through Atlanta. He moved it, but behind. All that control led to silence heavier than boardroom secrets. His mother, Dr. Celeste Wells, had passed when he was just 16, but she was the only softness he had ever known, a nurse with gentle hands and fierce love. The kind of woman who smiled at strangers and wore her compassion like a crown. Her memory was carved into him, especially that symbol she used to wear on a simple chain, a radiant sunburst nestled in an open hand, the hand of light, she had called it, a symbol she had designed herself as the logo for a private initiative she ran before her death, a healthcare scholarship and outreach program for Black girls with potential but no safety net. When she passed, the fund was shelved by the board. The records were buried. But Kingston never forgot Dot, and now, there it was, inked into the skin of a girl who had no idea her body carried the heart of his past. He had spent a decade quietly, reviving his mother's work beneath the surface of his massive empire. Hospitals, clinics, aid, all disguised as philanthropy departments under corporate spreadsheets. But none of that mattered in that moment. Not the money, not the legacy. Only the girl who had just stepped unknowingly into the center of something deeply personal. The tattoo wasn't coincidence. It wasn't fashion Dot, it was a message. Connection. A whisper from a woman long gone. He didn't know if it was fate, but he knew he had to find out who Zariah Coleman really was and why she carried the mark of a legacy he'd been chasing his whole life. The next morning, Kingston called HR without offering explanation. Move intern Zariah Coleman from records to my personal division, he said, effective immediately. No one questioned it. No one dared, and Zariah, stunned and confused, reported the next morning to a matte black door on the 91st floor, a floor interns never saw. A floor that belonged to the man who already knew more about her than she could ever guess. And just like that, her life, the one she had spent years carefully piecing together, was about to be rewritten. Zariah stood in front of the door on the 91st floor, her breath caught somewhere between nerves and disbelief. The hallway behind her was silent, the air thick with power. This wasn't just a new assignment, it felt like stepping into a different dimension. She tugged her blouse straight, adjusted the strap of her bag, and knocked once. She expected a receptionist, a team, some kind of buffer between her and the billionaire, but the door opened immediately, and there he was, Kingston Wells, not a headline, not a rumor, a presence, tall, sharp, quietly commanding. His skin a deep, rich brown, his hair cut close, his jawline like it had been carved with precision. The crisp white shirt he wore had the sleeves rolled to his forearms, revealing veins and control. Everything about him radiated restraint, discipline, focused Dot, but when his eyes met hers, something unreadable flickered across his face. "Miss Coleman," he said, his voice low and composed. "Come in." She stepped into the office like it was a temple, Dark wood, clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows opening to the Atlanta skyline. No assistant, no distractions. Just silence and space, and him. He gestured toward a leather chair. She sat with practiced grace, keeping her eyes low, her spine straight, but her hands trembled slightly. Kingston noticed. He noticed everything. He watched how she sat posture perfect, but shoulders tight. He noticed how her fingers moved with precision, like someone used to carrying too much and still pretending she wasn't tired. He recognized her in a way that had nothing to do with her resume. He handed her a slim folder. "You'll be working directly under me," he said. "This is a confidential initiative focused on community redevelopment, healthcare accessibility, and education equity. I believe your background makes you suitable." Zariah blinked. Healthcare, education? She hadn't known the company even touched that kind of work. She opened the folder and scanned the documents. Her brow furrowed. Numbers, budgets, grant proposals. Program outlines. This wasn't clerical work. This was strategy. Kingston watched her closely, saw the confusion in her eyes. "We don't advertise this part of the Wells Group," he said, almost smiling. "It's the heart, not the headline." She nodded quietly, and so they worked. Hours passed that first day, heavy with unspoken questions. Kingston barely spoke unless it was necessary. He stayed seated at the desk across from her, his voice even, his presence steady. But every so often, when she reached for a document or tucked a loose braid behind her ear, he found his gaze drifting. It wasn't desire. Not in the obvious sense. He was used to beauty. The world threw it at him daily, but with her it was different. Zariah didn't try to impress him, didn't bat her lashes or flash ambition. She didn't try to charm. She was just real, unshaken, focused, and something about that unsettled him. The strangest part was how right it felt to have her there. And that, more than anything, disturbed him. Meanwhile, Zariah tried not to think too much about the man across the room. Tried not to notice the way his voice dipped when he read aloud, or how he smelled faintly like cedarwood and clarity. She had worked around powerful men before, professors, donors, men who wore respect like a costume until they wanted something. But Kingston wasn't leering. He wasn't trying to impress. He was watching. Not possessively, not intrusively, just carefully. It made her want to stand taller. It also made her afraid, because whatever this was between them, this pull, this quiet current, it was real. And real was dangerous, but neither of them said a word, because some sparks don't explode. They smolder. 3 weeks into her new role, Zariah had found a rhythm. Early mornings, coffee that barely cooled before the next meeting, proposals, revisions, long silences across Kingston's desk that felt more intimate than words. She had started to feel a kind of confidence, not safety exactly, but stability. He never overstepped, never made her feel small. And somehow the tension between them had settled into a quiet rhythm until the day she found the footage. He was out of the office. A meeting across town. She stayed back to organize his notes, tidy the desk, prep for a call. The room was quiet, peaceful. Then the tablet on the side table lit up with a soft ping. The screen displayed the security app. She didn't mean to open anything. But one swipe, one tap, and there it was, a folder titled Level 88 Lounge. Her breath caught. Her finger froze above the screen. Then the image loaded. It was her. Frozen mid-motion. Shirt half off, hair damp. That night. Panic ripped through her. She stepped back like the screen had burned her. Shame, raw and sharp, surged through her chest. She hadn't known. She hadn't meant. When Kingston returned minutes later, he immediately felt it. The shift in the air, her posture, her silence, Her eyes didn't rise to meet his dot. Then he saw the screen still glowing, and he knew. Zariah. He began softly, but she had already backed away. You watched it, she said, her voice barely holding steady. You saw me. He opened his mouth. Nothing came. Why didn't you delete it? Her voice cracked out. His silence answered for him. You made me feel safe here, she whispered, voice trembling. And all along. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to dot. She was gone before he could respond. She didn't return the next day dot or the day after that dot age, or reached out. She ignored them. And Kingston, for the first time in years, found himself powerless. It wasn't guilt anymore. It was deeper, that hollow ache he couldn't shake. The look in her eyes when she asked him why hadn't he deleted the tape? The truth terrified him even more than the question, because he had kept it. Not for the wrong reasons, but because it was the first time in years he had felt something real dot by the end of the week. He broke every rule he'd written for himself. He called in a favor, one of the few. He was owed and legal and tracked her down dot. She had gone back to her old floor. Her old duties, as if none of it had happened. He went there himself, unannounced dot, and when she turned and saw him standing by the file cabinets, her whole body stiffened. What do you want? She said quietly, hurt tucked behind every word. He didn't speak. Right away. Just stepped forward and handed her a sealed envelope. Dot inside was a USB drive and a signed affidavit. The file is gone, he said. This is proof. She looked at it, then at him. Her eyes shimmered. Why did you keep it in the first place? His shoulders fell. And for the first time, he let down his walls. Because, he said, his voice cracking slightly, you reminded me of someone I lost. She blinked. Someone I loved, he added. My mother. She was stunned. The words hit harder than she could explain. He told her about the tattoo, the symbol, the connection, about Celeste Wells and the private scholarship fund and the lives she had tried to save before she died. And Zariah hurt, but not hardened. Dash listened that she didn't fully trust him again. Not yet, but she agreed to come back with boundaries, with clarity. Dot, and slowly, day by day, they rebuilt something fragile. Dot, each interaction charged with what they didn't say, each glance too. Long. Dot, each brush of hands almost unbearable, until one night, while reviewing blueprints for the new clinic wing, their fingers touched across the table. Neither moved. The room went quiet. Dot, Kingston whispered her name like it was a prayer. She looked up, wide-eyed, searching. Dot, and then he leaned in, not out of ego, not to claim but gently, like someone asking permission with his breath. Their lips met. Dot, soft. Dot, careful. Dot, slow. Dot, a kiss that asked, can we heal what was broken? When they parted, Zariah whispered, this changes everything. And Kingston nodded. It already has. But the next morning, her desk was empty again. Kingston waited until 10 the next morning. He paced the office, her side untouched. The tablet powered off, the silence pressing in around him like judgment. Every hour without her felt heavier than the last. He called once, no answer. Texted twice, nothing. By 2 o'clock, he left the office entirely. He rode the elevator down, floor by floor, each level colder without her in it. Zariah had taken sick leave, according to admin. No detail. No updates. Her employee profile now marked inactive. Kingston stood in the hallway outside her department, fists clenched, jaw tight, every instinct in him screaming to let it go. Be the CEO, be rational, be safe, but he couldn't, not anymore, because the more he looked for reasons to forget her, the more the truth tangled itself deeper into him. It wasn't about the kiss, or the tape, or even the tattoo. It was about the way she carried pain with grace. It was about how she never asked to be seen, and still left him unable to look away. 3 days passed. Then the answer came from someone. Unexpected. Carla, head of legal compliance, entered his office with a manila folder and a strange look in her eyes. You said you wanted everything we had on Zariah Coleman, she said gently. You should sit. He did, and she opened the file. Inside, hand-signed letters, program notes, an old photograph, faded ink, and one name that lit everything inside him on fire. The Celeste Wells Memorial Scholarship Fund. Zariah hadn't just appeared. She had been chosen. Carla spoke carefully. She came in through an old educational endowment. The Marian Hope Legacy Fund. It's under your mother's name. One of the last she approved before she passed. Kingston felt the room shift. His mother hadn't just designed the symbol. She had found the girl that, scholarship quietly funded, long forgotten, had supported a handful of high-risk, high-potential girls from the underserved Black community. Records had gone missing after her death. Most were lost to time and budget cuts, but Zariah had been part of a final cohort. Kingston's voice was low. She never knew. No, Carla said, and neither did we. Until now. He didn't sleep that night. He stayed up reading every page of that file, every handwritten note from his mother, every medical history, every teacher's recommendation, and then the photo, a little girl, no more than 7, standing in front of a run-down brick house, holding the hand of a woman with soft eyes. Celeste Wells, his mother. Zariah wasn't a stranger. She wasn't just the girl on the camera. She had been part of his life before either of them understood it. The next day, he found her. Not at the office, but sitting alone in Bryant Park, her head low over a paper coffee cup, her braid curled tight over one shoulder. She looked up when he approached. Her eyes widened. Not anger this time. Just confusion. You found me, she said quietly. I needed to, he answered, sitting beside her. I know who you are now. Not just the intern, not just the girl in the footage. Her brows knit together. What are you talking about? So he told her about the letters, about his mother, about the photo of her in the garden of the Wells estate. Zariah's hands trembled. I don't remember that, she whispered. I never knew. He reached for her hand, not to claim it, but to anchor her. She chose you, he said, even back then. She saw you, before I ever could. Tears welled in her eyes. Not out of romance, but something heavier. Something real. Grief, awe, disbelief. She took a deep breath. That night, she began, when I walked into that lounge, I was just cold. Tired, trying to survive another day. I didn't think someone like you would ever notice me, let alone watch. Me, she paused. Her voice wavered, but when you did, when I found out you had kept it, everything I had buried came up at once. The shame, the fear, the past. She looked away. My mother wasn't like yours. She wasn't kind. She used people, sold whatever she could to get by, including my trust. Her voice cracked. I thought if I worked hard enough, studied long enough, I could outrun all of that. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. You didn't deserve any of it, he finally said. She shook her head. But I still let you kiss me. That scares me. He turned to her, voice soft but firm. You think I kissed you because of that camera? You think that's all you are to me? Silence. He leaned closer. I've seen thousands of people come through my building. Their faces blur the second they leave. But you, I noticed you before the footage. Long before the kiss. And now that I know who you really are, I see you even more clearly. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like running, but life rarely waits for healing, because just as she nodded and agreed to walk back with him, Kingston's phone buzzed. A message. He looked. Face went pale. A screenshot. The original footage. Leaked. Posted to an anonymous investor board. Captioned. Wells's new intern. Or something more? Zariah froze. What is that? she asked. Kingston turned the screen toward her. She gasped sharp, broken, raw. Her face went white. I deleted it, he whispered. I signed the affidavit. I wiped every trace. But the footage, the same silent, intimate moment from the executive lounge, was now online, blurred but unmistakable. Posted by someone with access. With motive. He moved fast, pulled her into the car, called legal.security.pr. The next 12 hours blurred into a storm of conference calls, shutdowns, spin, and containment strategies. But the damage had already been done. Zariah's image, her vulnerability, was public now. She hadn't asked for it. She hadn't prepared. And she hadn't broken Dot until the silence hit. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't accuse. She just curled into the corner of the guest room in Kingston's penthouse, knees to her chest, arms around her legs like the little girl who used to sleep through sirens and shelters. He stood in the doorway, helpless, and when she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse and hollow. I trusted you. He stepped forward slow, like not to spook her. I know, he said softly, and I'm going to fix this. Her voice cracked. How? It's out there. Now, they'll all say I got the job because of that moment. Because of what I took off, not what I've worked for. Kingston knelt beside her. No, he said. We're not letting them define you by 30 seconds of stolen vulnerability. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor. So what do we do? She whispered. We show them the truth, he said. We show them who you are, what you've survived, what my mother saw in you, what I see in you. She looked up slowly. Her eyes, still wet, but fiercer now. What if they don't believe it? He didn't flinch. Then they were never worth your story in the first place. That night, they didn't sleep. Instead, they wrote a plan, a press conference. No scripted apologies. No denials. Only facts. Letters. Her voice the next morning. They stood side by side in front of the press, the city, and the world. Kingston's hand rested gently at her back, not possessive, but grounding. Zariah stepped to the mic and read aloud a letter. It had been written by Celeste Wells years before her death, a personal note naming Zariah as a protégé, a girl of heart, hunger, and hope, a girl worth believing in. Zariah read every word with calm defiance, her voice steady, her truth unwavering. She didn't mention the scandal. She didn't defend herself. She just told her story. And when she finished, the room didn't explode. It exhaled. The narrative had changed. Not because they forced it, but because she claimed it. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. The headlines the next day didn't scream scandal. They whispered something new. Love built on truth. The intern who became the architect. But their work was just beginning, because pain doesn't disappear in applause, and survival isn't the same as peace. Zariah returned to the office. Brace for the glances, the whispers. She slipped into meetings and tried to focus. Tried to pretend the weight on her shoulders hadn't doubled. Kingston stood firm beside her. But inside, he was unraveling. The boardroom questioned his judgment. Investors murmured about nepotism. Behind the scenes, he launched an internal investigation into the leak, but walls blocked him. Deflections, silence, layers of betrayal. One afternoon, as she was locking up her office, Zariah found him waiting by the elevators. His face was tired, but his eyes were razor sharp. He didn't say anything until they stepped into a private conference room with glass walls and silence beyond. Then he closed the door. It was someone close, he said. Someone I trusted. Zariah's heart sank. They copied the footage before I deleted it, he explained. Fake dates, added captions, manipulated the narrative. She waited. Then he said the name. It shocked her. Someone she had once worked with. Someone she had once believed in. someone who had pretended to support her while plotting her humiliation, betrayal. She realized is colder than exposure. It's a choice, and it cuts deeper than shame. I'm going to fire them, Kingston said. But doing it will make this even more public. I don't want you to burn your name for mine, she said. But he shook his head. You're worth it. They made a pact. No more hiding. No more silence. They would face the world as they were broken, mending real. And yet, in the back of his mind, Kingston still wondered, would his mother have been proud of how far they'd come? Zariah didn't just return to the office. She returned with fire. After the leak, after the headlines, after the betrayal, something inside her had crystallized. She was still scared, still haunted, but fear no longer ruled her. She threw herself into the work, into the Wells Hope Clinic initiative, into community proposals, into mentoring young girls whose stories echoed her own, girls who hadn't been seen until now. And Kingston saw it. All of it. In meetings. He gave her space to speak. In press calls, he credited her vision. He didn't shield her. He amplified her. He called her the backbone of their new outreach division. And still, every compliment felt like a double-edged blade. The world wasn't done testing her. Not by a long shot. She still heard the whispers. Still caught side eyes. In the elevator. Still overheard, isn't that the girl from before the voices trailed off? One day, outside the building, a reporter cornered her. Bold. Blunt. Why do you think a billionaire CEO would choose you? Zariah's jaw clenched. Did you sign any private contracts? The reporter asked, leaning in. Do you regret getting involved in the scandal? She took a slow breath, looked the reporter in the eye. I regret nothing, she said. I didn't get this job because of a video. I got it because I fought for everything in my life. And I won't apologize for surviving. The reporter blinked. Then asked the final question. Are you his girlfriend? Zariah paused. Not from shame. But from clarity. Then she said it. I'm not his project. I'm his partner. Across the street, Kingston was already walking over, having caught the tail end of the interview. He placed a hand at her back, protective but proud. The reporter turned to him. Mr. Wells, care to comment? He nodded once, calm, composed. I saw the tape, he said, because I care about her, not because I had any right to. He let the silence settle. I protected her then. I protect our story now. I love her, and I believe in her. That's all there is to say. For a moment, nothing. Then slowly applause. A few passers-by clapping. Tentative at first. Then more. It wasn't a crowd's roar. But it was a wave, a turning tide. The next day, the headline didn't scream scandal. It simply read, built on truth, that Zariah didn't need headlines anymore. What she needed now was to finish the work, because the real storm was never the footage. It was what came after, the rebuilding, the reckoning, the refusal to let shame win. That board meeting Kingston had dreaded. It came swiftly, cold. Corporate. Brutal. Investors in rows. Some skeptical, some waiting to pounce. Some looking at Zariah like she was the disruption. Kingston stood in front of them, not as the CEO they feared, but as the man she loved. He laid out the facts, the manipulated footage. The breach of trust. The betrayal from inside. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He ended his statement with one line. If any of you believe her presence here diminishes this company's value, you're free to take your votes and walk. But understand what we're building isn't just profit, it's purpose. The boardroom held its breath. And voted. No removal. Kingston stayed. And the company's value rising. Afterward, he found Zariah in her office, silently packing up folders. She looked up, doubt in her eyes. I thought I was saving something, she whispered, but maybe I just made things worse. He walked to her, pulled her gently into his arms, and said, "Our story is bigger than fear. It's built on choices. And I choose you. Again. Always." That night, they walked through the streets of Atlanta arm in arm, past neon signs and bus stops and kids with wide eyes who didn't yet know what second chances felt like. Zariah realized that his hand in hers no longer felt like a risk. It felt like home. The next morning, Zariah and Kingston stood side by side at the groundbreaking ceremony for the Celeste Wells Community Health Center, a project born from scandal and rebuilt with purpose. Cameras. Flash reporters called their names, but they didn't pose. They dug their shovels into the soil together. Press, board members, local families, all watching. Zariah's grip was steady, her eyes focused, and Kingston's gaze, it never left her. Later, at the reception under open skies and hanging lights, they danced slowly on a small stone patio. No music, just their quiet footsteps and the night wind. He leaned close and whispered, "You finally belong somewhere." She touched his cheek. "With you," she replied, certain. But just as they found their rhythm again, life tested them once more. 3 weeks after the ceremony, Zariah received a call from an old mentor, Ms. Nadine Carter, the community college counselor who had helped her apply for the scholarship that changed her life. Her voice was electric with excitement. "There's a new donor," she said, anonymous. "But they want to launch a full scholarship initiative, and they asked for you to lead it." Zariah froze. "Me?" "They saw how you handled everything. The storm, the work, the grace. They believe you're the one." There were no strings, no contracts, just an invitation to a private meeting. Zariah didn't know what to think. That evening, she sat alone in the clinic after hours buried in profiles, student files, letters from girls trying to break cycles she knew too well. She felt both honored and overwhelmed. Kingston found her there, still in her work clothes, eyes red with fatigue, but glowing with something like hope. He handed her the letter from the anonymous donor. She read it, once, then again. Her fingers trembled slightly. "I don't know what I'm walking into," she said. Kingston placed a steady hand over hers. "You earned this, not because of me. In spite of everything you've survived." She gave a soft, grateful smile. The next morning, they drove together to the listed address, a brownstone tucked away in a quiet street in Vine City, not far from the apartment Zariah once called home. It felt symbolic, going back to the neighborhood she had worked so hard to rise from. Inside, they were greeted by Claire Clark, a soft-spoken Black woman in her late 40s. Founder of a rising nonprofit focused on educational access for underserved girls. "I've been following your story," Claire said warmly. "Not the headlines, the real one. The way you stood tall, the way you never folded. I want you to help me do that for other girls." Claire offered Zariah a leadership role on the spot. When Zariah turned to Kingston, unsure, he didn't hesitate. "You belong there," he said, smiling. At her official acceptance dinner that weekend, Zariah took the mic. Her voice was clear, steady. She didn't speak of shame, or the leak, or survival. She spoke of legacy. Of Celeste Wells, of second chances and the responsibility they carry. She didn't mention herself as a victim. She described herself as a vessel. But even as her future stretched wide with promise, another storm quietly gathered behind closed doors. Inside the Wells group, the tension Kingston had been monitoring came to a head. His CFO, Marcus Caldwell, a man meticulous with numbers but blind to people, had grown increasingly agitated with Kingston's shift toward philanthropy. He saw charity as a liability, purpose as a distraction, and Zariah as a threat. He had been watching. Digging. Spending company resources to hire a private investigator to comb through Zariah's past. What he found was nothing criminal but vulnerable. Her. Childhood. Her mother's addiction. An incident at 13. That never made it to juvenile court but was still buried in a school. Report. Whispers. Rumors. Fuel. Then it dropped. A tabloid headline, from foster care to CEO's bed. What the public doesn't know about Zariah Coleman. It was cruel, untrue, in many parts, manipulated in the rest. But it hit hard, and it hit fast. That night, Zariah woke to her phone buzzing with alerts, headlines, mentions, screenshots, tweets. Her eyes blurred with tears. The past she'd spent years outrunning had just caught up, and Neon. Kingston found her pacing the living room barefoot, tears streaking her face. I thought I buried this, she cried. He pulled her into his arms. I trusted this company, she said through sobs. And they used me. No, Kingston whispered. He did. One man. And we'll make it right. His voice was steel, his hands steady. He didn't wait. He called Claire. Board members. HR. Legal. By noon the next day. 3 executives had resigned. Under investigation. 4 News. Outlets issued retractions. The tabloid changed its headline from exposed to clarification. But the pain remained. Zariah, tired of playing defense, walked into Kingston's office and handed him a letter. It read, I may be flawed, but my life is mine, and I will not let shame dictate the narrative anymore. Let the world know. Let them see my past. Let them understand that survival isn't a weakness, it's a badge. A second chance isn't charity, it's earned. And I will carry it with pride. Kingston read it once, then twice. Then he signed the bottom. Together, they released it. And for the first time, the internet didn't tear them apart. It listened. It watched. And it learned. The statement went viral. Not for scandal, but for wisdom. For once. Pain was not clickbait, it was testimony. Weeks passed, and with every day, the tides shifted. Zariah's scholarship program, once just a vision, became real. Applications flooded in from girls across the state, girls who had survived abuse, poverty, abandonment, girls who had stories Zariah recognized in her bones. She read every essay, every name, every plea. She didn't just select candidates, she saw them. Kingston watched her work in quiet awe. The same woman who had once shrunk from the weight of a leaked video was now reshaping futures with ink, compassion, and strategy. Their story no longer centered on scandal. It had transformed into a blueprint for redemption, for purpose, for real love. 2 months after the article storm, a digital fundraiser was held for the Celeste Wells Initiative. Broadcast live from the community center, it reached tens of thousands of viewers across the country. Kingston opened the event. He introduced Zariah not as a survivor, but as the architect of the project. He said her name with reverence, then stepped back, and she stepped forward. Her speech wasn't dramatic. It didn't ask for sympathy. She spoke of opportunity. Of community. Of how a second chance isn't just a gift, it's a responsibility to lift others. She didn't cry this time, but her voice, strong and unwavering, cracked something open in every person watching. And Kingston, he never looked away. After the lights dimmed and the cameras powered off, he turned to her quietly and said, now we leave the stage. What comes next is real. She smiled, a real, gentle smile. And I can't wait to build it, she said. They returned to the penthouse that night, not as scandal and CEO, but as 2 people choosing each other again. Kingston walked to the bookshelf and pulled out a worn envelope. Inside, a first edition of her favorite childhood book, The Little Prince. On the title page, in his handwriting, it read, for Zariah, who helped me find my heart again. She stared at the inscription, eyes misted. Then she looked up at him and said, nothing ever written was better than this moment. She kissed him, Not out of gratitude, but choice. And love, the real kind, took root, quiet and unshakable. Months. Past that, the media's obsession faded. News scandals rose and fell, but what Kingston and Zariah built stayed. The Celeste Wells Center opened its doors, glass walls gleaming in the sunlight, its mission printed boldly at the entrance: healing, dignity, equity across town. The Marian Hope Legacy Program, Zariah's nonprofit, sent its first 10 girls to college. Every single one had a past that could have shattered them, but now they had futures instead. Kingston remained the sharp, relentless CEO, but something had shifted. He no longer saw the empire as his alone. It was theirs, built on truth, run with soul, measured not just in profit, but in people. And Zariah? She wasn't that girl anymore. She was a name, a leader, a mentor, woman who had taken the ugliest moment of her life and turned it into light. One evening, as they walked through the Celeste Wells Center, hand in hand, Kingston paused at the donor wall. He stared at one name, then another. Evelyn Celeste Wells, founder, visionary. And just beneath it, recently engraved in gold, Zariah Coleman, legacy, builder. Zariah stared at it. Her breath caught, her eyes wide. I didn't know you were doing this, she whispered. Kingston brushed a hand across her cheek. You belong here. Not because of me, because you carved this place into the world with your own hands. She didn't doubt it anymore. Outside, the skies darkened, and a soft summer rain began to fall. They stepped beneath the awning, just watching the drops. Zariah laughed, a full, radiant laugh. The rain used to scare me, she said. Made me feel small, cold, like everything could be taken away. Kingston turned to her, his voice quiet. And now? She looked up, eyes glistening. Now it feels like baptism. He pulled her close. Love doesn't wait for perfect timing, he said. It finds you in the middle of your wreckage. And it stays. She nodded slowly. I used to think love was for other girls. The ones with better stories, softer beginnings. He shook his head. No, he said. Love belongs to the ones who don't run, who choose each other even after the world tries to tear them apart. She looked into his eyes and said, Then I choose you. And he replied, And I choose you again and again. They stood there in the rain, wrapped in each other's arms, no longer billionaire and intern, no longer rumor and headline, but two people who had walked through fire and refused to come out bitter. Zariah leaned into him, letting the rain wash her face. It didn't sting anymore. It felt like grace. Their story had been torn apart, spun, twisted, doubted, but they hadn't. Broken. Because love, when real, doesn't shrink beneath scrutiny. It deepens. The world kept moving. New scandals emerged. New headlines chased attention, but Zariah and Kingston moved forward quietly, steadily, like roots growing deep beneath the noise. Inside the Celeste Wells Center, every hallway echoed with purpose. Each room filled with mothers, children, students, people who felt seen for the first time. Nurses treated patients without fear of cost. Mentors guided girls who reminded Zariah of the one she used to be. The nonprofit she led became a force of its own, and she never let the mission outgrow the heart. Every decision circled back to the question her life had taught her to ask: who gets left behind when the world moves too fast? She made sure the answer was no one. Kingston, once a guarded fortress of a man, had changed too. He still closed billion-dollar deals, still ran the Wells Group with relentless precision, but now he spoke with softness when discussing community grants. He sat through student interviews. He listened, and he gave not just wealth, but presence. And time. And belief. One night, as they walked the quiet halls of the clinic after the last board meeting, after the last staff had gone home, Kingston paused at the same donor wall. More names had been added. More lives changed. Zariah traced the gold engraving beside her own, and Kingston looked at her. "You're not the girl from the tape," he said. "You're not the mistake or the moment. You're the miracle." She turned to him, tears welling not from pain, but from peace. "And you're not the man who watched," she whispered. "You're the man who stayed." They walked to the glass lobby doors, rain still falling outside. Zariah looked up. "I used to believe mistakes disqualified me from love," she said softly. "From leadership, from safety." Kingston stepped closer, but they didn't. "No," she smiled. "They just taught me how much it matters when someone sees all of you and stays." He leaned down, kissed her forehead, and held her there, because the truth wasn't in the footage, it was in the aftermath, and how they chose to rebuild, how they chose to forgive, how they chose to love, not in private, but boldly, out loud, unashamed, and as they stepped into the rain, Zariah lifted her face to the sky, arms open, no longer hiding. The world would always watch, but now she was ready. For every woman who had ever been made to feel like her story was shame, for every man who believed vulnerability made him weak, for every person who thought brokenness meant disqualification, this was their story. Not a fairy tale, a testimony, because love, when it's real, doesn't rescue, it recognizes. And Zariah and Kingston, they didn't just find love, they chose it, again, and again and again.